So welcome to the last event of our Uni Writers Festival on Zoom, and we'll be on Facebook and YouTube later. My name's Ashleigh North. I'm one of the editors at Glass Magazine with the QT Guild. Tonight we'll be hearing from the following guest panelists on their creative practice and experiences in the writing industry. If you're a student in attendance, feel free to ask questions throughout the panel. We'll have a dedicated question time towards the end. For our panelists, I'll direct my questions, but I'll also pause for a moment or two afterwards. So if you have anything to add, that's incredibly welcome. Before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional people of the lands we're gathered on. Glass Magazine is created at QT on Turrbal and Yuga Islands, and I'm seated today at home on Yugambeh land. We're very lucky to be joined by Rohan Wilson, Ella Jeffery, Melanie Saward. Did I get that right?
Close, Saward.
Saward, oh man.
All right, it's a hard one.
And Rowena Beresford. So I'll introduce everyone individually now. Dr. Rohan Wilson is a writer, teacher, and critic. He is the author of 3 novels, The Roving Party in 2011, To Name Those Lost in 2014, and Daughter of Bad Times in 2019. His work has won numerous awards, including the 2011 Virgil Literary Award, the 2015 Victorian Premiers Award, and the 2016 Adelaide Festival Award. He lectures in creative writing at QUT. His academic research has focused on fiction's difficult relationship with history and the ways in which the Australian novel imagines its connection to the past. We have Dr. Ella Jeffery, who has just published her first collection of poems, Deadbolt, which won the Puncher Wattmann Prize for First Book of Poetry in 2019. Ella's poems, essays, and criticism appear in journals and anthologies, including Meanjin, Southerly, Island, Westerly, Best Australian Poems, and many others. She has performed her work as a part of the Emerging Writers Festival, the Digital Writers Festival, and the Queensland Poetry Festival. Ella co-edits Stilts, a triannual digital poetry journal, and is the poetry editor of the Australian academic journal Social Alternatives. She holds a PhD from the Queensland University of Technology. We welcome Melanie Saward. Melanie is a Meanjin-based writer and editor, a proud descendant of the Bigambil and Waka Waka peoples. Melanie has received a highly commended award in the 2019 Calibre Essay Prize, which was shortlisted for the Queensland Literary Awards 2018 David Unapon Unpublished Indigenous Writer Award, and was a 2019 featured author at DJ Press. She can also be found under the handle Little Red Writes online. And we also have, I just gotta pull up my chat in the Zoom. Rowena Beresford is both the commissioning editor and managing director of Yellow Brick Books, an independent traditional publishing company she co-founded in 2016. Yellow Brick Books started with offbeat, quirky, and humorous picture books and is now expanding into middle fiction. Rowena is also the founder of the Book Curator magazine, which keeps school librarians up to date with a wide range of fantastic fiction from independent and mainstream publishers, and equips them to better match those books to readers. Well, thanks everyone so much for dedicating your time to this panel. So I'm gonna proceed with some of the questions. My first one was for Melanie. I've heard that you're also completing a manuscript as a part of your PhD studies. We'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I am writing about, I'm writing a chick lit actually. Usually I write literary fiction, but I'm going in a different direction now. And I feel like I'm a bit on the spot, and Rohan's my supervisor, so he's going to be like,
yeah, I'm listening to everything you say.
How is she going with this?
Yeah. I'm marking you.
Yeah. So my aim is to write a chick lit that it has an intersectional protagonist. So not because I'm an Indigenous person, I want to write an Aboriginal protagonist, but I also want to make sure that I don't do things like swap out humor that's, maybe taken on other people. So I feel like I'm terrible at this. very nervous about it, actually. I want to make sure that the protagonists aren't sort of making fun of other minorities. And the silly thing about it is my little friend here in the background that you can see. So my story's set in a doggy daycare. So he's my muse here. He's helping me right now. So it's set in a doggy daycare in New York City, and got lots of silly little dog things that happen in it, but I'm also trying to do something really serious and feminist as well in a silly chick lit, I suppose, is the way to talk about that in a really terrible, rambly way.
Well, that's a really good answer. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I thought my PhD was the only thing that I wouldn't talk about, so it's the only thing I didn't think about.
Sorry, because I caught your reading at the
yes.
Yeah, so if you are in the audience and you were at the recent Pride Salon, you would have actually heard an excerpt of that, which was amazing.
An excerpt that Rowan has not even read.
So I also have a similar question for Ella about Deadbolt. We'd love to hear firstly a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Deadbolt is my first book of poems, which I also wrote as part of my PhD, just like Mel is doing now. And the book is about quite a few things, but I would say that kind of primarily it's a book that's about the way in which we make and remake home. And the word that I usually use when I talk about it is renovation, which is something that we sometimes think of as maybe a either, you know, we conjures up images of like the block and watching reality TV, or it conjures up images of, you know, like your mom or dad sort of screaming around the house and ripping up the carpet and then not knowing what to do next. Or maybe it conjures up some other images, or maybe it's not really a familiar word at all. But I think that renovation is also about building and rebuilding homes in lots of different ways, in sort of figurative ways, as well as in ways that have to do with the physical space of the house. And so my book is very much about how we build and make different homes in different places, and it takes place across a whole series of different sort of years, but also a whole series of different sort of countries, specifically here in Australia and Shanghai in China, where I used to live. But there are also poems that take place in Europe and in America. So it's a book that is a little bit expansive in that way. It goes all over the place.
Would you want to give us some insight maybe into the whole publishing process as well?
Sure, absolutely. So that could be a really long answer, but maybe I'll make it a little bit shorter. And if anybody wants to know any more, you know, we can always talk about that in a bit more detail. But I would say that the process of writing the poems and publishing them was a very iterative process. Like, it took something like about 6 years for this book to come together. So there are poems that I published all the way back in 2013 that have gone into the manuscript of this book. And equally, there's probably about 50 poems that didn't go into the book, or that were cut out or that were removed. And so I think the process, and those might have been poems that I did publish along the way. So I think probably about half of the book has been published in various places prior to the manuscript actually getting picked up. And I think that that's a really kind of important, that was a really sort of important step for me in finding a publication pathway for the manuscript as a whole, is sort of developing that portfolio over time. And then I entered this book at the end of 2018 in a manuscript prize run by Puncher Wattmann, which is an independent poetry publisher based in Sydney. No, it's based in Newcastle now. And the book won that prize, which was a huge and incredibly exciting moment for me. I found out while I was at the self-checkout in the supermarkets and just screamed and dropped my bagels on the ground and scared everyone. But it's really exciting, and I feel justified in screaming at that moment and at that time. And that process then took probably like maybe a year and a half, factoring in sort of the pandemic that happened as we were kind of getting ready to send the book out into the world. And I just had my book launch last week, actually, this time last week, I was sitting in front of a computer talking about Deadbolt again. So it's been sort of about a 2-year process from the point of which it was sort of like a manuscript to being the book itself. And that at times felt like it was happening really fast, and at times it felt like it was happening really slowly, like it was at a glacial pace and I was never going to see it in real life. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, Ashleigh, but I don't want to ramble on for too long. So you just let me know if there's anything else you want to know.
I mean, we love a ramble, but it was a really good answer. So yeah. I'm also curious, you answered a lot of my questions, but I was curious, were there other people involved in that process?
In the process of publishing the poems as a manuscript, or in developing?
Editing and then in publishing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so I wrote this book as part of my PhD, as I said before, and so my supervisors were really instrumental in helping me get feedback. And you know, I think that's just one of the best parts of doing a PhD, is that you have somebody who you can trust and whose opinion that you really value, who will, you know, look at the work because it's their literal job. And that, I think, is, you know, a spectacular thing to have as a writer. It's a real privilege to get to have that experience. And so I got lots of feedback in that sense, but I also got lots of feedback from my poetry group. So we have a poetry group that meets once a week, once a month. Once a week would probably be a lot, but once a month. We used to do it in person and sit down and have a glass of wine together, and now we sort of do it over Zoom and grumble about that. But the whole point was usually to sort of sit together. We would each read a poem, people in the cafe would look at us funny, and we would all get a bit of feedback on our work, and it kind of feels good to be able to just show your work to somebody. To just read it out loud and get some feedback, even if, you know, often it's really positive feedback because everybody loves each other. But that's sort of the nice kind of warm, fuzzy side of it. And then you can rely on your supervisor to give you, you know, the tough talk that you maybe need. So lots of people, yeah, definitely helped me. And, you know, my friends and family who listen to me read all the time, even when they don't want to.
Well, thank you. So I have another similar question for Rowan. Firstly, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about your 3 novels.
Would you like to hear just a little bit about each one? I can tell you just briefly what each one's about, if you like.
Yeah, that might be a good start.
Sure. So my first book is called The Roving Party, and that's about the Aboriginal Tasmanian genocide that happened in around the late 1820s, early 1830s in Tasmania. I wrote about a guy called John Batman, who was a bounty hunter paid by the government to take a team of convicts and black trackers out into the forest around Ben Lomond in Tasmania and capture or kill as many of the local clans people as he was able to. So I used his diaries and letters and things like that to reconstruct the journey that he took. It's a pretty grim time in Tasmanian history, but it's a really important story to tell. I felt like it was an important story to tell to get at the truth of what really happened in Tasmania, because there's a lot of silence around the genocide in Tasmania. So that was my first book. My second book is called To Name Those Lost, which is a sort of a follow-up to that, to my first book. It imagines Tasmania sort of after the frontier has passed. The frontier history in Tasmania finished around the middle of the 1830s or the early 1840s. And after that, Tasmania became sort of happily sort of capitalist. So in To Name Those Lost, I write about that process of transformation as Tasmania becomes like recognizably modern. You know, a government is set up and taxes are imposed, and the anarchy of the frontier kind of fades away and is replaced with this fairly brutal kind of you know, system of control that governments imposed on people who didn't really want to be controlled at all, people who had no interest in being controlled. So those books, I feel like they're like a sort of a married couple. They live together in my imagination, like husband and wife somehow. So at the moment, I'm working on a new married couple. Well, I've published one last year, which was called Daughter of Bad Times, and that book is set in the future. It's about climate change and what's going to happen to people who live in countries that will be swallowed by sea level rise, and where will they end up. And in that book, I imagine that they'll end up in a refugee system that's been corporatized, and they'll be exploited for their labor. And so that was a really fun book to write. I really enjoyed going into the future and trying to imagine what Australia in the year 2075 might look like. But for the book I'm working on right now, the one that's closest to my heart, it doesn't have a title yet, but it's about a mother and daughter who have been estranged, have been torn apart from each other for about 10 years. They haven't seen each other, and they're thrown back together again. And to rebuild their relationship with each other, they play a computer game together. Again, it's sort of partly set in the future. The game they play is set in the future, but the lives they live are sort of in the present. So it's about this weird dual world that they live, where they ordinary people doing ordinary things, but then at night time they become extraordinary people doing extraordinary things in this other world. It's about escapism. I think, we all want to get away from this kind of grind, this 24/7 grind of paying our mortgages and going to work for our bosses, don't we? So it's basically what I'm writing about in my new book.
Thank you. I have a whole list of questions. I guess one of the most interesting things about history writing for a lot of people would be that research process. How long does it usually take for you to do all of that research?
It takes as long as you have. It will fill up all the time you have if you let it. So you have to know, I guess you need to know as much as you need to know is the short answer for that question. And you don't know what you need to know until you've written a draft of your book. So the best thing to do is read and research and get enough ideas to write one draft. And as soon as you can write a draft, that will tell you what you need to research next. So that's usually how I do it. I read a lot, probably spend about 6 months or so, 12 months reading and taking notes and getting the basic information down. And then I'll write a draft or two, and then I'll go back and do more research and fill in the holes that are popping up in my manuscript. For example, in To Name Those Lost, I didn't know anything about how money worked in Tasmania in 1874. I just assumed that people paid with coins or gold or something. I don't know. I didn't really know. So I knew that my characters needed to be fighting over money. But when I went and did research, I found out that banknotes were just like pieces of paper. They weren't printed by the government. They were printed by banks. Each individual bank in each little town would print its own notes, and they were like an IOU. If you took that note to a bank, they would exchange it to you for gold sovereigns. So little details like that. Once I found that information, it became an integral part of the story, and I could use that to sort of move my characters through the different spaces I needed. I knew I could force them to go to certain places at certain times, which was really handy for the plot. So, yeah.
I think, this is an odd question someone's given me actually. But before that, I'd love to ask Rowena a little bit about, I think what you do is probably a bit more of a mystery to us.
Sometimes it's a mystery to me as well.
So what's your day-to-day work like?
Fairly insane. Basically, I have my finger in lots of book-related pies. So I have my publishing company, so we're publishing children's books. I have a membership service for school librarians, so we're publishing a magazine as part of that. And I also have a book distribution business, so we have a wholesale distribution service and education supplies. So I get to see the book industry from all the sides other than the writing. So everything from editing through to marketing and distribution and publishing and all of the ways through that.
Wow. How did you end up in a role like that?
The usual way these things happen is you start off in one little corner and just keep gaining ground, finding more things that are interesting, getting involved in something, somebody comes up with an idea. I actually originally started with an educational publisher, doing accounts and then doing business management, and then kind of went on from there. And it kind of never stops.
Do you have a creative background, or are you more business minded?
I think both. I do a lot of editing and design work, or like leading design, not actually doing the technical side of it. Editing I absolutely love. I love the opportunity to take somebody's work and make it the best it can possibly be, you know, as far as you were able. And that's a really fantastic feeling to see an author, you know, feel really excited about the end product and really see their work come to life. So yeah, I love that whole creative experience of doing that, and also the opportunity to give writers feedback and really help them develop their career, and to really think about what are the things that are going to make my story better, and, you know, how do I work to always be building my opportunities as a writer.
I have to admit, I think that's like a role that a lot of students are really interested in, and it feels kind of like a mystery, you know. How do you end up there, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry, I haven't prepared specific questions, but I'm genuinely really interested in like I suppose, did you always know that you were gonna end up, you know, editing, you know, putting on so many different hats?
No. So I've had a lot of different careers over my 35 years of working. So I've been in publishing for nearly 20 now. But yeah, as I say, it was just kind of an auspicious moment, I guess, that I started working for a company that did publishing, and I've always had a passion for books. I was reading the newspaper before I went to kindergarten, because that was my dad's kind of show-off thing, you know. We're just like big book people, so readers from day one. And so when I did fall into it, it was like, oh my goodness, this is heaven. Like, except for the fact that you go, books are amazing, books are amazing. And then your office starts piling up with books. And you're like, I love books, but if I don't do something with these, I'm going to be buried in a pile of books shortly. So, yeah, I think that, you know, just to kind of reflect back on what you're saying about how do you end up in a place like that, one of the ways that I'd strongly recommend to students is to make sure you're doing internships, because I've hired quite a few people from internships, and it's definitely the best way to get a really great vision of what it's like to work in the industry, and also for people in the industry to get a look at you, because it's really easy for us then to see, oh wow, like I've literally had people I go, I really want to make something happen for this person, because even if I can't, I'm introducing them to people and making opportunities for them, because there's something about them that I think really I just want to help nurture. So it's definitely the number one from a uni student through is make sure you get a good internship.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that advice as well. What do I? Trying to navigate two screens. It's not easy. This was my odd question that someone submitted to me. And it was, I think originally directed at Rowan. I think your students would be particularly interested in hearing what you were like as a young adult, as a recent high school graduate. So in other words, your life before writing.
My life before writing was a mess. I was a terrible person for a long time. I graduated, I did an honours degree. So, you know, when I was a student, I was okay. My life was pretty good. But after I graduated, I went off track really badly. And I ended up just working a lot of different dead-end jobs. I worked as a waiter. I worked in I worked in a sushi shop. I worked in heaps of different cafes. I was a really bad employee because I would be, my head was never in it. You know, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer, and that was all I thought about all the time. So it's difficult. I think one of the things about being a writer is you need to be really, really self-directed and self-disciplined. And I just wasn't for a long time. And it's not something, I find it really difficult to teach students that kind of self-discipline, because you have to want it so much that it forces you to sit there and work for hours a day, day after day after day, you know, year after year, with no reward, because there's no reward for writing for a long, long, long time. You know, it takes a while to get good at it. And I find it really difficult to convince people that that's a smart thing to do. I couldn't convince myself it was a smart thing to do when I was young. I found it difficult to get myself to believe that it was possible. after a while in the jobs market, you know, I'm getting belted from pillar to post by bosses who didn't like me, and you know, different jobs that just ground me down. I eventually learned that there's nothing worse than this. This is as bad as it gets. So I might as well just do the work on my own and try and take a shot at writing and see if I can do it, because, you know, if I can, then I've got a way out of here. So that was my motivation in there. And I think a few years in the reality of the jobs market is a really good motivator to get you writing, because it's bad out there. And I feel bad for students. I know what they're going through, having to work and study at the same time. So I don't have easy answers about that, but I would say that you just have to write every day. That's what it comes down to. You just got to do it every day, even if it's only for half an hour or 20 minutes. If you do it every day, eventually you'll produce something that's publishable, I think.
I'd actually also like to direct that question at our other panelists, if you don't mind. So Ella, what were you like as a young adult before writing? I mean, you are pretty young now, but
maybe I don't feel that way most days. That's interesting. I was actually thinking about that as I was listening to you talk, Rowan, and I was trying to think about whether there was sort of like a time before writing, but I sort of think my time maybe came, my break from writing perhaps maybe came in the middle of my 20s a little bit. So I got a job in publishing before I'd finished my undergraduate degree. So I sort of did what you were talking about, Rowena, which is do an internship. I was just in the right place at the right time. When somebody else who was working at the publishing house left to go overseas, they offered me a short-term contract, and then a bigger contract opened up. And then I had a sort of permanent job in publishing, which kind of felt to me like someone had just put the Holy Grail in my hands. You know, it was something that I had dreamed about, and everyone had said, oh, it's going to be like really, really difficult. And it is, it definitely is. And I certainly worked really hard and spent a lot of time trying to get myself to a position where I could get an internship and where I could start working. And, you know, I started working in the marketing department of a publishing house, which just came out of some work I had done in the marketing department of my university. So that I think is really important, is just taking work where you can get it, even if it's not in the right part of the publishing house, even if you want, you know, I knew I wanted to work in editorial, and I just took that job, and then I ended up in editorial. You know, you can always sort of get promoted and move from within. And then I loved publishing, but it was sort of a little bit, yeah, again, Rowena, what you were saying, which is the books were piling up on my desk. I had 50 manuscripts that I was carrying around all the time. I spent all of my time indoors, and I loved it, but I started that job when I was 19. And so by the time I was 22, I was a bit fatigued from working full time, and I thought, I just need to maybe do something else. And so I quit, and I moved to China, and I freelanced there for a while. So I just spent a bunch of time riding my bike around Shanghai and editing when I felt like it. You know, I'd saved up some money, and it was, the cost of living there was a little cheaper. And so I could kind of have this quite nice life where I did a bit of editing for Chinese companies, where I would just sort of work on tidying the translations up that I was looking at, working on that sort of thing, which was a nice sort of way to develop my portfolio. And then I came home and did an honours degree in prose writing, kind of thought like maybe I'll start a novel, which I never really sort of fully committed to. I think I always knew that I wanted to write poetry, and I had always been writing poetry, but I think I maybe felt like you were supposed to write a novel, or like the novel was sort of the more logical and commercially viable thing to do. But I'd been publishing a few poems here and there in Australian journals from overseas. So I never really had that time. Maybe when I was 18, I was sort of a bit freer of it and was doing bits and pieces. But yeah, once I was 19, I was sort of working in a publishing house, and then I had to keep my cafe job at the same time because I didn't know whether that publishing house contract was going to end. So I would work 5 days a week at a publisher, and then work the weekend at this cafe, and then do uni in my sleep, basically, you know, at night, whenever I could find the time. And then, you know, after I did honours, I went back to China, and I moved back and forth for a while. Finally came back here to do a PhD, and that's where I've been ever since. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I'll direct the same question to Melanie as well.
Yeah, okay. So mine, I'm a bit like Rowan. I've done 1,000,001 things. I actually didn't go to uni straight out of high school. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a singer. And I auditioned for QT Music actually. And it was a year where they used to grade you on an A+ to a D kind of scale, and I got an A, not an A+, and it was the year that they had only enough spaces for the A+ on my audition, so I didn't get in. And so I just kind of wandered, I feel like aimlessly, for a little while in a coffee shop. I used to do the night shift at the international airport at the bar, because I liked money and I didn't care about sleep, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. And then I sort of was entertaining the idea of, this is completely tangential to, I kind of entertained the idea of being a paramedic for a while. Before there was a paramedic degree, so I got a job working doctor that needed someone to also bandage wounds and do spirometry tests. So I was a receptionist who occasionally worked in the treatment room, because I thought it made me look like a good candidate for the ambulance. So random things that I've done. And so when I was there, I kind of just worked my way up in through admin land and ended up in medical marketing, and found that I read a lot of books. They used to make fun of me because I worked in Milton, and I'd walk down to Mary Ryan's Milton and buy about 10 books a week from Mary Ryan's. I'd spend all of my money on books, and was like, oh, I actually like the writing part of this job. So I ended up doing a lot of copywriting, and worked my way up actually into graduate positions. So I was a full-time marketer in a graduate role without a degree, just by starting from the bottom and working my way up. But I wanted to write all the time, and I was getting into trouble because I was logging in and writing fan fiction on my lunch break. In this very serious pathology marketing job. And my mother said to me, Melanie, I think you probably want to write. And I said, oh, no, I need a serious job. So I actually applied for uni to do a journalism degree, but I didn't apply in Australia because I don't do things by halves. And I went off to Canada, and I was supposed to do a degree at a university in Canada. And then I was about to start the semester, so I quit my job and I sold my car and I moved overseas, and I was back in like 3 months or 4 months because they hadn't told me the right information about how much it cost to do the degree, and I couldn't afford it. And while I was wandering around sleeping on people's couches, I decided I should just apply for uni in Australia. And I got into creative writing at QT, and then the rest is kind of history. While I was at QT, all I wanted to do was work in publishing though. So my parents, I promised my parents I was going to stop faffing around, is the exact words that I used. And that by coming to do creative writing at QT, I didn't think I was going to win the Miles Franklin or be a famous novelist. But I had my fingers crossed behind my back. I said, oh, it'll help me get a job in publishing. So that's what I did. I did my creative writing degree, and I took off to New York before I'd even finished really the degree. Back in the day, we used to hand our assignments into assignment minder up at the library. So they were paper ones and you had to get them scanned in. I handed in my last assignment, and a week later, so I didn't even know if I'd passed it, a week later I got on a plane and moved to New York, and I was there for 6 months trying to get a job in publishing. And obviously I didn't. Actually worked in doggy daycare, so you can see some themes coming along there. So it took a really long time. I came back to Australia and did my, I did a postgrad certificate at UQ in writing, editing and publishing. And then before I'd finished that, I got a job at HarperCollins. So I worked there for a few years in editorial, and then came back to Brisbane, back to corporate marketing yeah, so like I move around a lot, but I think the thing that I would tell students as well is you got to keep trying, and tangential careers are really helpful. I know a lot of students that I teach want to work in publishing as well, and Rowena, you probably know that, seeing them coming through internships and so on. And I didn't get the internships. I was a really keen student. I didn't get the internships, but I still got a job in publishing because I volunteered and worked really hard. I went to the Writers' Festival. I always tell my students in editing subject that I would go to Avid Reader and go to launches, and I'm quite shy and anxious, and I would say I have to meet 3 new people, and it didn't matter whether they were publishing people, but it helped if they were. And I'd go up and I go, "Hi, I'm Melanie, I'm a QUT graduate and I want to work in publishing. How did you get your job?" And I did things like that because I wasn't the internship student. I wasn't the straight 7s recommended for everything kind of student. I was kind of mediocre and tried really hard. And I think that I've kind of proved that you can have a career in those sorts of things by, not doing uni straight out of school and not always getting straight 7s is, a thing. Like, don't give up if that's you.
What's coming next, Mel? Do you want to get back into publishing, or are you keen to try something different?
Oh no, I want to write now, and obviously I'm doing my PhD, so I'm quite committed to academic life. I don't know, there's part of my brain, I don't know, Rohan and Ella, you might be able to tell me, you might tell me different, but there was part of me that thinks that while I know academia is also a bit of a slog, particularly at the moment in COVID times, that, I love research and learning new things and writing, and that is a job that allows me to do all of those things. And I was never happier than when I was an undergrad at university, and that was that feeling that I chased. Like I loved working in publishing. I loved it, but I couldn't write my own stuff while I worked there because I was like you, Ella, going home with like 20 manuscripts under my arm and sitting up all night reading. And I worked in a kitchen shop on the weekends because they don't pay enough for you to live in Sydney. So I was like working 7 days a week and like 24 hours a day, and it was amazing. But I wanted to write as well as work with authors, and I kind of get to do that now, working with emerging writers in the undergrad program. So I think hopefully I'm here to stay for a while now.
Well, thank you. And I have the same question for Rowena.
Yeah, so much like Rohan, I was not exactly a stable, shall we say, adolescent to early adult. I came from a reasonably underprivileged background, and I actually really wanted to be a fashion designer. So I wanted to do theatre, costume design. My mum was an actress, and fashion design. So I did work in that for a while, but I'm the kind of person who gets once I've learned everything in a job, I'm bored, witless. So I've spent 35 years kind of, I've done that job for 2 years. I've learned everything I can possibly, I've sucked every bit of knowledge out of it I can, and now I'm on to the next thing. So I just kept taking the doors that opened, I guess, over my life. And I think Melanie said something about tangential careers. And the thing that I think is really encouraging is that when you get a bit further down the track, you look back and see how all of the things that you've done have somehow contributed to where you are now, even if they weren't a direct line. So, I worked as a PA and did, a lot of administration work and different things. And you do all different kinds of writing. Like I've done a huge amount of business writing and marketing writing and editing for other people and that kind of thing. And it all kind of builds and adds to what you have to offer. And when you're in book publishing, other than the really large publishers, the rest of the publishing industry is little guys, and what we need is people with diverse skills. So it's not about just coming in and being able to just do one thing. Georgie, who's my right hand, does all kinds of things, you know, editing, marketing, design work, you know, production, like everything you could think of, because it's just what you have to do in order to make it work. You know, we all have to cover a whole lot of different things. So having other experience is actually really beneficial. And I think eventually your path leads you where you need to be. You know, if you just keep, if you're really miserable somewhere, move on, find something else to do that's got some level of interest for you, and realize that, you know, all of that will contribute to finding the thing that you really want to do for a longer period of time.
What do you think the key skills are then, Rowena? It sounds like just being adaptable, being able to work in a team, and just, you know, the basics like that.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, for me as an employer, I really look for people who've got great attitude. So attitude is always the biggest number one thing, because you can teach people skills, but if they've got a crappy attitude, you can't deal with that. And if they're not willing to just dig in, so you have to be able to look at the business you're working for as, it's up to all of us to make this successful. It's not just up to my boss to make it successful, or up to the marketing department to make it successful. You know, it's up to all of us, and everything we do contributes to the well-being of that. And being willing to, you know, come up with ideas and contribute your amazing brain. Like, you know, a lot of people sit in jobs and don't think about the way that, you know, if you actually open your mind up, you can really think, oh, wow, hey, I've had an idea for this. And I love it when my staff do that. Like, that is just the best, because I know they're really engaged with the business. They really want to see it succeed, you know. It's not just my poor old tired middle-aged brain that's got to come up with everything. I can get some, you know, young and fresh ideas. And it's brilliant when you get team members who are like that and just will do whatever it takes. They don't do the whole, oh, that's not my job. Because quite frankly, if somebody said that to me, it probably wouldn't be their job for very long.
I always tell my students that a passion for books is one of the most important things that you can have. And I think I'm sure they look at me like, that guy's lost his mind. Like this is business we're talking about, passion for books, but it's true. Like if you really love that, you have to really love it. Like you have to love it with your whole heart. And that's the difference for a lot of people, because loving it and being prepared to give your all for it and work hard, and you know, that's the difference for most people. That motivation that you get from loving it so much pushes you.
Absolutely. And let's face it, none of us are going to be doing it for the money, right? Because this is not an industry that you make a lot of money from unless you're really, really the fortunate few. You know, it's, if you make a living, you're doing well. So it's not an easy industry from that perspective.
You have answered a lot of my questions in the midst of this. I guess to expand on that a little bit, talking about current research kind of tells us that creative people tend to work in a lot of different disciplines. And I think we've mentioned hospitality, business, administration, marketing, things like that. So I guess my more fun question would be, do you have any secret talents or talents that you don't maybe use as much as creative people?
Can I answer that one? This one's a good one for me. Now listen, I'm being deadly serious here. I am in the top 5%, ranked in the top 5% for player versus player in a game called Destiny. I have a kill death ratio of 2.0. Which probably doesn't sound very impressive to any of you, but it's taken me years to get this good at that game. So, it's a very hidden skill. Nobody cares. Even my wife doesn't care. I'm the only person who cares. But I feel very proud because I'm an old guy and I'm battling against teenagers mostly when I play. And they kick my ass a lot, but I've gotten better. And I'm starting to get pretty good now. So it gives me something to do on a Friday night, you know, to wind down. Some of my students get it. I've mentioned it to a couple of them and they were really impressed. So some of them get it.
Maybe you can write a video game next.
Well, I'm doing the next best thing. I'm writing a video game book, which is about as close as I can get.
Did anyone else have an answer to that question?
I feel like all the other things I do are also creative. So like I still sing and I take ballet. That's my weird thing. I got on point this year. I'm in my 30s and I can now dance on point, which is really, you know, it's something that happens when you're 10 usually. And I didn't do ballet as a child, so I guess that's my weird thing. You know, Rohan says video games, his Friday night. I'm Sunday, all day Sunday, just about in the ballet studio, absolutely flogging my feet.
That's really impressive, Mel.
It is. That's amazing.
I'm pretty excited about it, although my feet look very weird. Someone looked at my feet today and said, "Oh, you've got well-developed big toe muscles," which I thought was something I would never hear someone say to me.
Such a
very
weird
odd
compliment. Such a strange compliment. I don't know if this is really yet a skill, but maybe like in a few years I'll actually be good enough that it'll be a proper skill. But I'm learning Mandarin, so I can speak sort of like basic Mandarin. Well, I can speak sort of like yelling Mandarin that I learned in bars in Shanghai. Like I can say the kind of thing that you would say to people in a bar, but I'm learning it formally now. So I'm kind of getting better at the sort of writing elements. And I guess a bit like you, Mel, I kind of see it as a creative thing. It's part of my writing practice, in the sense that I think it's sort of unlocking another part of my brain that I need to use when I'm writing, and that makes me think, you know, as a poet, I think, and I know all writers do, but you know, we spend such a huge time fiddling at word level, you know, and that's sort of what I spend so much of my time doing, is just negotiating words on a page on like this incredibly incremental sort of level, and being able to do that in a really kind of different space. You know, Mandarin sort of takes me really outside of even the alphabet that we're used to, the order of words in a sentence that I'm used to, the way that I'm used to speaking and the inflection that I use. And it sort of really defamiliarizes language in a way that makes me feel very adrift in something that I'm usually so comfortable with and so used to sort of picking apart. So it's a kind of nice, not yet a skill, but I'm hoping that it will be something that, you know, like when someone asks me that question in a couple of years, I'll be able to sort of just, be across that. Yeah.
Learning another language is one of the best things that poets and writers can do. It absolutely is. You're right. Like it does something to your brain, doesn't it? It makes you think about language in a different way.
And I've just been obsessed with it for years. And I've always wanted to do it. And for whatever reason, I only in the last couple of years has started sort of formally doing it and thinking about it. And it of course just makes me think about, like, why didn't I sort of sit down and go to school when I was in China, which would have been much more helpful, because then I could have actually learned it while I could use it all the time. Whereas my teacher is saying to me constantly, like, oh, can you, go and see if you can have a conversation with someone. And I'm like, well, I work from home, or, especially during the middle of the pandemic, and like sitting at home being like, oh, okay, well, who will I talk to? There's 2 people in this house. But yeah, it has been a really, really good generative thing.
I think learning a language also helps the students that want to be editors as well. So if there's a chance to take a language as an elective, when I was an undergrad, I took French, and it was just getting back into that, just even back into terminology, like understanding what adverbs were or so on. And I think that going back into that mechanics is sort of helpful again when you're then thinking about how to apply that in English, and when you're editing and writing in English as well. I think it was, when I did it, it wasn't because of that, but it ended up passively really helping me with that sort of thing. So, language, I think language is a great skill to do.
It's funny that you actually mentioned that, because as a kind of, it'll sound promotional, but for the festival this year, we collated students who were bilingual, and we got them to do poetry or storytelling in their own languages. So we launched a kind of SoundCloud for the magazine. And it's just an experiment, but I don't know, it's always fascinating to hear people. We didn't translate them, we just sat and listened to them. Yeah. Did you have an answer to the same question, Rowena? Not to put you on the spot.
I feel very unskilled in this group. I tell you what, I don't do any of those things at all. Everything I do is pretty much geared towards my business, but I guess my secret superpower is that I see the world in patterns. So, which can be as silly as somebody says to me, oh, I was really looking for a such and such to do whatever. And I'll be like, oh, there's a business in, Perth that does that. And they've had this really interesting, way of doing it because of blah, 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 through to seeing patterns with people. So like connecting people together. Also like with continuity, because that's another pattern. Like it's one of the things that's a really good skill with editing, is being able to kind of do the continuity thing. I reckon I should have become like a continuity person for movies, because you see like where there's a gap or something's changed or whatever along the way. So yeah, it's probably more about what goes on in here rather than doing any fabulous skills like ballet or languages or video games. Definitely not my forte.
I don't claim to be fabulous. It's a thing I do sometimes.
Well, it's very impressive though. I mean, it's great that you're doing it. Good on you.
Oh, okay. So I've got a good one. It's another silly one. I will get back to the more sensible questions in a second. Are there other mediums that you're particularly interested in besides, just the written word? For example, are any of you TV show nuts? And if so, do you have TV show suggestions for your students?
I'm going to jump in and say that I am a TV show nut, but not in a way that is useful at all to students. And in fact, I try and never mention this in the classroom or to anybody, because it doesn't. I sometimes think it's not a proper thing. I spend a lot of time, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about renovation, and so I'm a bit obsessed with The Block, and I really love to watch that show. And I wrote a really substantial portion of my thesis on The Block, and I've written book chapters about it and stuff like that. So I really love TV, and I really love writing about TV. I've also written chapters about things like slow TV, which you've maybe seen, the really kind of long train trips and stuff like that. I'm really interested in reality television as a medium through which kind of current cultural norms and ideas are kind of negotiated and played out. And I think that that's actually something that both poetry and TV do in interesting and really contrasting ways. Yes, I'm an absolute nut for TV, but I also just love a sitcom or just a general TV. Like my favorite show would be It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I think is just like the best writing, the most absurd sort of writing that I've seen on television, and I really love that. So that would be my suggestion, although not certainly for like a cozy watch on a Friday evening. You have to be sort of willing to be a bit put on edge by it.
I think Rowan was booted out somehow. There we go. Did anyone else have an answer to that question?
Well, I put myself in it before and said I used to write fan fiction before I was an undergrad. So yeah, I get very invested in TV. I don't write fan fiction anymore, and you won't find it on the internet if you go looking for it, believe me. But yeah, I spent a lot of time. I'm such a nerd. I was very obsessed with all 3 CSIs back in the day. And that was where I spent most of my time writing CSI fan fiction. I don't know why. I don't do crime fiction now. I've got no interest in writing crime fiction these days, but I really liked it. I don't think, like Ella, I don't think it's something that's of much use to my students, but I think confessing that I was a fan fiction writer, I think that for me, it got out a lot of those things that you want to do as an early writer, and also it got me used to, you know, like early writer things, like you want to insert yourself into the story in some way that's really obvious and maybe a little bit cliche, so I did that a lot. But also the thing about the fan fiction and online writing community is that it actually was a community, and people would review and read for you. And so it meant that when I came to uni, critiquing was something that I really liked, because I was used to people telling me how to improve my work. So, you know, it's a little embarrassing to say that I used to do that. I used to write Doctor Who fan fiction for a little while there. I used to write Greek mythology fan fiction, like I'm a super nerd. But those sorts of things and getting involved in those niche little communities was really, really helpful for my writing. So, you know, if any of you did that or still do that, it's actually a really good practice. And, you know, 50
Any
Shades.
writing's good, right?
Yeah, exactly. And 50 Shades of Grey, right? It was fan fiction once upon a time.
Yeah, any writing is good is probably doesn't apply to that.
Maybe not, but any writing can potentially make you money. So
I think I think Ella, Rowan, and you, Melanie, as well, do work with like young writers. So you probably know that the majority of your first years either started with fan fiction or are still on fan fiction. Yeah. Yeah. Did anyone else want to answer that question before I move on?
Yeah, so I'm a streaming TV addict, basically. I have every streaming service just about that there is. And one of the things I love about it is that it's given so many opportunities to stand-up comedians. And so I watch a lot of stand-up comedians. And but the two shows I've really enjoyed of late, which I'm very late to the party on these, is Black Books. That is hysterical. And Upstart Crow, which is the Shakespeare one. If you haven't seen that, that is seriously funny spin on Shakespeare. Definitely worth watching.
That book is pretty old now, isn't it? Would that be...
It is, yeah. As I say, I'm quite late coming to the party on that, and I think Upstart Crow is probably pretty late as well. But I just came upon them on Netflix and absolutely love them.
Yep, very funny.
I'm not sure if you caught our question, Rowan, because I wasn't sure at what point you were booted out.
No, I missed it. What was it? I'm sure I can answer.
Well, unconventional question was, are there other mediums that you're particularly interested in? Particularly, are you a TV show nut? And if so, do you have suggestions for your students?
I am not a TV show nut at all. In fact, I don't watch TV at all, really. I did watch Game of Thrones and sort of enjoyed that a bit. Outside of Game of Thrones, I don't think I've watched another TV series in probably 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I probably sound like a bit of a snob when I say that, but I don't like it. Like they're not, the characters are so thin usually, and the stories are so obvious. It's probably just that I've had some bad experiences. I watched a few shows and didn't like them and just kind of gave up on the whole thing. I know there are good shows out there. People tell me. I've heard that Schitt's Creek is supposed to be really well written and great. Yeah, a few people have told me that now. A few people whose opinions I trust, so I'm prepared to give that one a go. But I've tried so many that just people were raving about, and then I watched them and just went, "This is rubbish. I don't know how people can sit through it." So, but I do enjoy movies. I watch quite a few movies, but most of like if I have a free few hours where I don't have anything else to do, I usually just jump on and play games. I play a lot of games. I've played all the big games from the last 10 or 15 years. And to be honest, most of those are rubbish as well. They're just as cliched and just as terrible as most of the TV shows. But because it's interactive, you can kind of forgive the storylines for being so lame, because you get to, it's a bit more self-directed. Like you can make your own storyline in a lot of those games. So
choose your own adventure.
Yeah, you really can. Some of them, it's unless you're a real gamer, which I don't think anyone else on the panel here is, but it's hard to put across how complicated and how interesting contemporary computer games are. Like the ones that are being released, in the last few years, are incredibly deep. The stories and the amount of freedom you have to direct your own story, and meeting characters. You can have romances with characters, and you can start feuds and get revenge on people, and just you can do whatever you like, really, and it's just really, really fun. It's escapism, but it's a good time.
More serious question. As educators, what challenges do you see students or recent graduates struggle with the most?
I think something that we've talked about a lot is that idea of sort of discipline and motivation. And I think that there are always going to be other things that you have on, or other things that you need to do. And to me, the thing that really makes a writer is literally just doing the writing. You can have all the opportunities in the world, or you can have none of the opportunities in the world. And if you don't have a book, that doesn't really matter. Or if you don't have words on the page, it doesn't really matter. And I think a really, really crucial thing that I always sort of try and talk to students about as much as possible is just the discipline, not necessarily of having, a time set aside every day, because I think sometimes a rigid routine can easily be broken, and then, it's a disaster if it breaks, and, people sort of feel like, oh, panicked, I've wrecked it and I can't go back. But instead having just a commitment to knowing what you want to do and working your way there in a really programmatic way. So to me, it's not that kind of like big dream, this is the big thing that I'm going to do, it's all going to be like flashing lights and whatever. It is just a sort of incremental process that you do bit by bit. You write one poem, you write one story, you write one chapter, and the next thing, and then the next thing. And that to me is how you get anywhere. It's not by sort of overwhelming yourself with really sort of big ideas, which I think can easily sort of fall through or be disheartening. And that's the thing to sort of avoid, because it is a place, the industry is a place where you get rejections. Everybody gets rejections all the time. You get rejected from things that you really wanted. You work a long time on a residency application and you don't even make the short list, or you apply for funding that you really needed and you don't get it, or whatever happens. That stuff does happen. But knowing that you're sort of moving towards something and having a kind of goal in mind that isn't too fixed but is quite clear, I think that is the one thing that's perhaps missing a little bit, or maybe isn't focused on as much as it could be. That's just my sort of way.
I think the other thing, I reckon it's related to that actually too, is that that our students often feel a bit of imposter syndrome, right? And I think that I often talk to students who think that they've got to wait until after third year when they walk across the stage and get their testimony to say that they're a writer. And you're a writer the second that you write. That's what writers do. You don't need to finish your degree to try submitting things. I mean, I see it, a lot of students are participating in submitting to Glass, and Rowan's got the students doing Scratch That, and we've got lots of students that are publishing in zines and so on. I think we are sort of shifting, but there is a lot of time where you have students that we tell them, submit this story, and they go, oh yeah, it's not ready to be submitted yet, and it's never going to be ready. I have pieces that I have tinkered with and submitted, and sometimes they get a little bit closer, but you get them back and tinker with them, and they're actually never going to be finished. And Rohan and Ella, I don't know how you feel, Ella, now your book's just fresh, but I'm sure that even when you've got that book in your hand that's printed, that you actually can't change anything in, that there are things that you want to change. And maybe, Rowan, have you ever changed anything in the next print run? Because when I used to work in publishing, we often had authors go, oh, can you rearrange a sentence or something for that next print run? So, like the thing to say there is that it's never ever going to be finished or perfect for you. Always going to see something that can be tweaked and changed. So don't wait to graduate to call yourself a writer. You are a writer, and the sooner you start calling yourself that, I think the sooner you'll believe that.
think something to add in there too is that your university degree is to help you learn how to write better and all the things around it. But it is not the thing that is going to get you a book deal. As a publisher, honestly, couldn't care less whether you have a degree or not. What you care about is the work. So you don't have to wait till your degree is finished in order to have legitimacy with a publisher. What you have to do is do the work. So it's important to keep the reason for your degree in mind. And what I often see with interns, because we get, I think it's third year interns here, they take internship as a subject. It's not something they have to compete for. They take it as a subject. And often they've been struggling with doing their assignments on time, or when we've had group projects with different intern teams, doing things on time because they're not managing all of those things well. And it's the opportunity to use all of that to really to help you get that discipline of writing and work out how to use your time effectively and how to craft words is more important learning overall than just the completion.
That's really good advice. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I did a class last week with some of my students we were just talking about how to get a job in publishing, and I was trying to get across to them the idea that, yeah, it's about skills that you build up. Like that's what employers care about. They're interested in what you can do and what capabilities you have. Like a piece of paper is nice and useful, and it's good that you're here at the university and studying, but it's not going to get you a job. It's
not at all. And in fact, sometimes, to be honest, people with degrees that have applied for work with us have not been the people that we've chosen, because they don't, just having that piece of paper is not the thing that gets you over the line. It's the paper plus other things.
That's right. And you can see skills. That if you go on to Seek and you just look at some of the job applications up there, you look at what editors want and you look at what publishers want. They very rarely say, we want you to be a graduate or we want a degree. Very few of them actually say that, because it's not that important.
And I've spoken to publishers that will say things like, you know, a university student who has potentially done undergrad and then maybe gone on to do a really concentrated editing and publishing course afterwards is great, but if they don't know how to use a photocopier and work in an office, then potentially all of those fancy pieces of paper don't sort of add up to much. So, you know, I always tell my students also, even if you can get a job volunteering in an office where you're doing administration skills, because all publishing jobs have a lot of admin attached to them.
That
would be really helpful. Yeah.
I've been surprised how many people don't know how to address a letter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you know, it's, and you think you can give them a simple task, but actually you can't. And that makes it more difficult, because then a more senior staff member has to train.
Right.
I was going to say, I remember when I started my internship, and one of my jobs was answering the phone. And I talk to students a lot about this, because I think everybody now hates answering the phone. You know, everybody has that sort of like cringiness about, oh my God, I have to answer the phone. And one of the first tasks I was given was just a huge list of phone numbers and an instruction to call basically every bookstore in Australia and basically make a promotional call saying, you know, our book XYZ has just won XYZ prize. Did you know about it? Have you got it on order? Would you like to stock it? So I basically sort of walked into this job where I had to kind of just immediately put down that sense of, oh my God, phone calls, like nobody enjoys that. Nobody wants to do that, and just go with it. And I think like that's the sort of best thing that you can do, is even if you don't have that experience, is to just go with it at the time. And you don't always have to say that you don't know how to do something. Like I used to get asked all the time, hey, can you design this ad in InDesign? And I would be like, yeah. And then I would Google it. And I would just figure it out as I was going along, you know. So you can sort of, you know, which isn't to say, like, I think that is great advice. You definitely can make so much out of having some of those basic administrative skills, more complex administrative skills, soft skills, all of that stuff. Just being able to kind of talk in a room of people is so valuable. Being able to present yourself well, all of that stuff is so, so important. And then just fudging some little bits in between is good too.
Bake it till you make it. That's what they say.
It's interesting, like, that those skills come up, because as like from a student perspective, if you don't mind me adding, it kind of, you feel like a giant overgrown baby, and everything just happens to you until by some chance, or if you're a go-getter, you know, you slowly start to feel more like a person who can do things. Yeah, so I think without this role currently, I definitely would not be able to do half the things I'm doing now. We just fabricated this panel, you know, we kind of created the entire magazine this year based on kind of a shell we had last year. So for students, like, it's so amazing being at a university where these projects do pop up and these opportunities do pop up. So yeah, even if it's not glass, I know Rowan runs a lot of student projects. And I was actually going to ask about some of them as well. We worked a little bit with Scratch That, but I feel like it would be really useful for students to kind of know, you know, how do those projects kind of work, and you know, what have those successes been?
I oversee a couple of projects. I oversee Scratch That, and I also oversee the QUT Literary Salon. So they are both student-led, student-driven. I'm there as like a project leader, but all the work is all done by students, and most of the ideation, you know, most of the ideas are all put forward by students as well. So they it's a direction that QUT has been going in. We recognise all of these things we've been talking about, you know, all of the things Rowena's been talking about. You know, we know that at the university, but the trick is, how do you teach people those skills? Like, how do you prepare students for what it's really going to be like when they graduate? And it's extraordinarily difficult. And basically we've found over a very long time, and not just QUT, but all universities around the world, and researchers looking at university pedagogy and how we operate have realized that the sort of general unit structure of lecture tutorial is just like, it falls short. It just falls short. It doesn't prepare students in the right ways anymore. So QUT now has a model that we call situated creative practice, which is just basically a project that we set up, and students come in and they get experience in lots of different skills. And Scratch That is one that we have. And we have, you know, it's a fully functional magazine. We have an editorial board, we have a production team, we have a video content team, we have a podcast team, we have a newsletter team. It's 38 people altogether. So you know, 38 is probably more staff than most of the magazines around Australia have, I would say. You know, we've got a lot of manpower behind us. And so students can come in and they can do all of those things. They can write letters, you know, and they can run the photocopier and do all of those kinds of things that will come up when they get into the real world. So it's been really gratifying. The students enjoy it a lot, and it's fun to teach, and it's fun to watch them go through that process.
It's a really beautiful project too. Just looking at it more recently, I've been reading along with everything, and you can kind of, I'm just a first year, so it's kind of like watching they're almost like mentors, some of the third year students, watching what they produce. It's really exciting. So I'm really glad that Scratch That exists, you know, alongside Glass. It's really wonderful to watch.
Well, mentor that's exactly right. Like, leadership is one of the things that is so difficult to give people experience in, and you don't get those opportunities in any other situation other than, you know, taking on a leadership role. And I'm constantly surprised at how good the students are at just being leaders and naturally stepping up and taking on a lot of work and being good at it. And once you give students those opportunities, they run with them and they love it. So yeah, it's great. It's great that you can see them as mentors, because they certainly are. And we see them as mentors, and we see them as leaders for the rest of the university.
I think the students that do those kinds of things certainly stand out, like ones that will take responsibility. And you always see it, like when we get a team of people working on something, there'll be certain students, you would have seen this in all kinds of teams, certain students that will take on responsibility, and others who kind of will sit back and let everything happen to them like they're in high school. And it really does stand out as an employer, you know, the ones who will take responsibility, because you know you can trust them to really like do the work and put in the effort and all those kinds of things, because none of us have got time to be chasing and to be trying to make people do something they don't want to do. So those opportunities that you're offering is a great way for students to gain, you know, more skills and experience and learn what it's like to be responsible and to have to step up into adulthood and do the kinds of things you're going to do in a workplace, which is fantastic.
That's right. And it is still in a university environment and they're still being assessed on it. But it's also real world learning and experience. It's stuff they can put directly onto their resume. You know, if you're one of a team of 3 editors who's been overseeing this production of this magazine, you've overseen 2 or 3 issues, you know, and you've got a team of 38 people underneath you. That's a real thing. Like that's a real experience that you can put straight onto your resume. And yeah, it's definitely going to help you when you get outside the university.
I have one last question from me, which was kind of a broad one. What was the best advice you received as a young writer, if you remember?
When I was an undergrad, and I think I was 3rd year, maybe, the Writers' Festival, Brisbane Writers' Festival, used to bring in a few authors to come in and speak at uni, and we'd get a week off classes, and the expectation was that you were attending these sessions that were put on. And I went to one with a Chinese Canadian memoir writer called Wei-Sin Choi, and he was this lovely, gentle man who came in, and as we came into the room, he handed us a piece of origami paper, and no, it was a piece of white paper, and he said, okay, so we're going to start by, I'm going to ask you all to fold a butterfly out of this paper. And everyone's looking at the paper going, I don't know how to do this. And then he took a piece of white paper and he made it a square, and then he origamied it into this butterfly. And it was beautiful. And he said, you've all failed and I've passed. And I just not done very well on an assignment and got rejected for something that I thought that I was going to get writing wise, and I'd been sitting there feeling like a complete failure, and then he just told me I was a failure. And then he did this talk about how now I'm going to show you how to fold a butterfly, and I'm going to give you instruction. And we went through it and we folded butterflies, and he said, you're going to fail and you're going to feel awful and feel horrible. And it's the same with writing. You know, you'll get an assignment back from your tutor and you might not get the mark that you've expected. And it might have, back in the day, it was red pen all over it, or it might have Turnitin comments everywhere. And you might have a big long comment on the side that tells you all the things that you've done wrong with your piece. And you might want to cry and die inside a little bit. And he said, but the thing to do about that is to take a deep breath and look at it and go, how wonderful, I failed. And here is an opportunity for me to learn all the things that I have done that I can now do right. And he talked a lot about how failure is a wonderful thing. And he folded some butterflies, and normally I've actually got them on my desk because he folded them with beautiful origami paper afterwards and gave them to us. And I usually keep them wherever I'm writing because it reminds me when you get those rejection letters that it's great because that wasn't the right thing for that piece or that story. And now I've got an opportunity to not fail again or to learn from that mistake. And I think it's a really important thing. Maybe it's a nice thing for students to take forward, you know, when you get those grades, a 4, a 5, a fail, a 7 is always an opportunity to learn. Any failure is an opportunity to learn. That's the best writing advice that I ever got. And it's, you know, I've gotten a lot of great advice, but that's the one thing that I come back to, and I have a little object that I can hold on to as well that reminds me that. And, you know, we all feel a bit shit when we get rejected or don't get a good grade. But it's an opportunity to learn. And I think those are the real writers. They're the ones that get back up again and have another go. And like Ella talked about before, you have a goal and you're moving towards something, and you know, the next failure might not be as big a failure, or you might get a little bit closer to things. And I have to tell myself that still now. You know, some of my failures now are things that I would have caught as huge successes when I was a student, but they suck right now. But like in a couple years time, I'll be like, oh yeah, that was a good one. I had to go through that to get there. So, you know, keep going. Yeah.
I think that the best advice I ever got was, a few students have pointed out to me that this actually is like, you can see it both ways, it has a flip side, but I forget who it was now. I think it was one of my supervisors at the University of Melbourne. It might have been Tony Birch, maybe, said to me that the best way, how did he phrase it? No, he said, if you treat writing as a job, it will become a job. And it took me a little while to figure out what he meant, but it was basically like, you just have to take it seriously and you have to do it a lot. You have to, you know, believe that it will get you somewhere. And when you do that, you end up making it into a job, like you'll make money out of it. And I sort of took that to heart and I was like, yeah. So I used to sit down at the same time every day and write all day, every day. And eventually for me, it has become a job. But you know, I've said that to other people and they said, well, why would I want writing to be my job? That's the last thing I want. You know, I want to do it because I love it. And so there is a sort of a flip side to that as well. Like there's a danger in losing the passion for it, or in it to be just becomes your meal ticket or something, or it's not about art anymore. It's about just paying the bills. And I think that's the battle that everybody in this industry faces. You know, if you take your writing seriously, it's impossible not to believe it has some kind of value or some kind of worth, like artistically. But as soon as you start getting paid for it and you start being forced to make those decisions, you know, you start to think, well, maybe I can target this audience. You know, maybe if I write it this way, this audience will like it. Like it just starts to make you second guess everything you do, and it's really difficult. I know as much as publishers would love writers to think that way all the time, for writers, once we start thinking that way, it just becomes a different kind of game. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any easy answers for that one. I just know that I try and treat writing as much like a job as I can without it becoming an actual job somehow. I don't know.
You know, I interviewed two of Australia's best children's authors, so Jackie French and Emily Rodda, and quite separately, they both said to me that the way they started out right at the beginning was to treat it like a job. And both of them came from a situation where they had no money. I think they were raising children, their marriages had broken up and things like that. And they worked every day doing their writing. Now, they would be two of the most successful authors in this country who've had enormously long careers, who still have an absolute passion for writing and don't write for, like, if you've ever met Jackie French, she wouldn't write to please somebody else. She's a phenomenal brain and she writes the things that interest her. And so, yeah, it's important not to, I was going to use a term that I won't use, like distort your writing. See, I actually wouldn't, as a publisher, like somebody to distort their writing in order to try and meet a certain need, because then there's no authenticity in it. I think if you write a really good work, there's always going to be an audience.
That's right. And that's what writers have to tell ourselves. You just have to tell yourself that you've got to write the work that's closest to your heart. And if it's good enough, people will want to read it. Yeah, there's a real danger in you starting to chase markets and chase audiences and write what you think people want to read. Yeah. I remember when I won the Vogel, Tim Winton was there to award the prize, and they gave me 5 minutes alone with him, just sort of have a chat to him before the ceremony started. And I asked him, oh, hey, Jim, got any advice for me, young writer? What can you tell me? And he's like, well, first thing he said, you're too tall. I said, oh, okay. Sorry, Tim, I'll do something about that. But then the next thing he said was, get yourself an agent. Otherwise, you'll end up as a hobbyist. And I sort of thought, oh, yeah, that's okay advice. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, what the fuck's wrong with being a hobbyist? You got something against hobbyists? Like, some of the best writers ever were hobbyists. Look at a lot of the poets never made any money out of it, did they? So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird thing in publishing. It's a business, but it's full of artists, and those two things often don't sit comfortably together.
I think the advice that I've been thinking of is a little bit along those lines slightly, Rowan. I really liked this piece of advice because I think sometimes, you know, when we get that sort of exhortation to sort of like send your work out and put yourself out there, and like that is so important, as we've all been talking about. But somebody I really admire also said to me, not all prolific writers are good writers. You don't need to be super prolific. So it's also about quality over quantity. You don't need to just be churning out stuff that you're just sending out randomly, or just trying to, you know, even like published, established authors sort of writing book after book after book becomes fatiguing if you're sort of turning out something constantly. And especially at the start of your career, you don't have to rush it. You don't have to sort of push your way just to the end of a book and just be like, oh, I've got to get it out to a publisher. You have time, and you have time to make sure that you do it in the way that you want to do it and to the best satisfaction that you can bring it to. And so worrying more about, okay, well, not necessarily, you know, this is where we're kind of towing that tricky line between, you know, excessive perfectionism and some of that imposter syndrome creeps in. So there's all that stuff there as well. But it's also just about thinking, okay, well, I can't just sort of like dash off a bunch of pieces and, you know, send them out wherever. It's like thinking carefully and you know, to me, so much of this industry and so much of the way that I have gone about maybe my career has been quite strategic, and I have tried to be quite careful and to think in advance about where things are going to go and what I'm going to do with them. And, you know, sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes you get 50 rejections in a year and you think, okay, well, crap, what am I going to do? And that's when you've got to give yourself like the butterfly pep talk about, you know, you have to sort of G yourself up again to go out there. But I do think that sometimes, especially in the sort of landscape that we're in at the moment, where content is churned through so quickly, people are producing more and more, and sometimes creative writing gets caught up in that. And I think that it's not necessarily the thing that you have to worry about so much. So that would be my sort of 2 cents on that, is that quality over quantity.
I think that the thing about taking time is just super important. I do a lot of feedback sessions at writers' conferences where you do like one-on-one with writers, and also obviously we get submissions all the time for our publishing house. And one of the things I really notice is how many people, particularly in children's writing, will just like slam out stuff to you, like especially picture books. And out of 100 picture books, you'll be lucky if 2 of them are worth looking at. And it drives us mad, because you would know as a poet that a picture book is really like a poem in terms of every single word matters to the nth degree. Like it has to be spot on. There's so many things that go into it. It's probably the hardest writing to do. And yet people will treat it as just like, oh, I've got a kid, I can write, or, you know, I've made a sentence before, I can make a 24-page or 32-page book. And what happens is you don't get another opportunity. If you send that to us before it's ready, we're not going to do the work to make it ready that you should have done. And sometimes that's actually quite frustrating, because I've seen some awesome ideas, like really good ideas, and I think I would love to publish that book, but they didn't do the work. And I don't have a year to coach them on how to do the work.
Yeah.
You know, and then that story's gone. That's wasted. I'm not going to look at it again. So yeah. It's just like taking the time to put forward your best work.
Absolutely. You know, Zadie Smith talks about this a lot. She's like, she always says, and I tell my students about this all the time because it's always a little bit horrifying. She's like, oh, the best thing you can do is just put it in a drawer for 5 years. And it's always like, oh, 5 years of my life. You know,
That's quite a long time.
It is a long time. You know, even to me that I'm like, oh, I don't know, Zadie. But you know, if you can just put it down and put it away for a little, I think it's all just about, that giving yourself some space to make sure you've done it properly to the best of your satisfaction. Because that's so true. You don't get a second chance.
And when you do go back and look at things down the track, like I know books I've been involved with or different things and be the same, you kind of go, oh, wow, I wish I'd known then what I know now. You know, I would have done that differently. I would have phrased that differently, or whatever it might be. And so it is excellent advice to like just stop and breathe and wait and go back to it later, because you get too close to things and you can't see them.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys so much for all of your advice, all of your answers, and obviously for all of your time. Sorry, there's a bit of background noise at the moment. My partner's just got home and set the dog off. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been really amazing, and I can't wait to share it with all of our readers and with your students, of course. Be sure to check out Ella's new book as well. And you know, I'll end the call now. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.